everyone, and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast, a podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and, with the help of the .NET community, present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman Taylor, and in this episode I talked with Harry Bellamy about supporting enterprise applications and how fast .NET is actually moving. This is the second part in a discussion with Harry about .NET. If you missed part 1, I'd recommend going back to that before continuing. The conversation is pretty much standalone, but there are some things that we refer to that we covered in part 1. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. It's a little scary, I think, for enterprise folks, because they're going to be like, what, you mean I've got to upgrade? Going from, I'm sure you'll understand this, Harry, and anyone else who's done .NET Framework stuff, wait, I've got to upgrade my runtime and the version number of my app every 2 years, which means I've got to retest it from the ground up because I don't know whether changing it from .NET 3 to .NET 5 will cause issues. And then I've got to go from .NET 5 to .NET 6 because .NET 5 is a short-term support. And then I've got to go from .NET 6 to .NET 8. I've got to skip a version because I'm going to leave it until the last minute because I'm an enterprise. What the heck? How? Oh, right? And I bring that up just because in the framework days, if you were jumping from 2 to 3 or 2 to 3.5, you had to separate some time to upgrade and then fix what was broken.
Oh, those... I think for me it was, yes, you had to fix things which were broken, but I think the biggest thing for me back in those days was the implications around how you would install the software on the client machines. So you go, right, okay, we're going from 3.5 to 4.5, let's say, for the sake of argument. We need the new functionality. Oh dear, it's going to break on all your Windows XP machines for a start because Windows XP stopped support at Framework 3.5, I think. Mm-hmm. And those people running Windows Vista and later, which I think Windows Vista... Anyway, let's assume it did support .NET Core 4. .NET Framework 4.5. I'm getting my frameworks mixed. My .NET's mixed up here. Come on.
That's the only problem with the naming convention, is it's so easy to mix them up.
Problem with this topic, isn't it? But anyway, no. But the fear was, oh, we're going to have to upgrade all these client machines, and we don't know whether they're going to work or not. And we also have to set aside a load of time to get people to manually click through all these installers. Windows Installer, Install Shield, yeah. You know, those were the days. And they're going to have to click through them. And they're going to have to see that it all works. And who knows, it might work. It works on my machine, but this is a dev machine, so it's got all this software on it. So it's probably going to work anyway. And I've only tested it inside Visual Studio, but I'm sure it will.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you can uninstall version, say, 4.5 of .NET Framework, but you don't know whether that backup strategy actually works.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Not until you've done it.
Because
right?
You've written a Windows installer yourself, and you know that uninstalling your own Windows installer is a pretty bad idea because Absolutely. You haven't written your cleanup scripts properly.
Absolutely.
So why would Microsoft bother?
Exactly. But then on top of that, if you've got a data center somewhere, let's talk data center, right? You've got a server in a data center somewhere, and it's running a version of Windows, and it has .NET Framework 3.5 installed, because all of the apps that are being served by that one server that you control are running 3.5. And then one of your apps is upgraded to 4.1. But the other 12 are still on 3.5, right? You don't know, without testing it on that machine, that installing .NET 4.1 doesn't break anything that 3.5 used. Now, you remember what I said earlier on about every time an update came out, they had to test as many scenarios that they knew about, right? And this is why they had like the private closed betas and then the public betas and then the release candidates, because it makes sense to get people just run your app on this and just make sure it works, right? Don't put it on your production server, but try it on another server first. Because you didn't know whether the other 12 or the other 14 apps on your machine that were running the different version of Framework, they were running 3.5, your new one running 4.1. You don't know whether they're actually going to boot again until you install it. And then, because it's a core component of Windows, reboot the machine.
Oh, yes. Oh. Yeah, it was. Yeah, and maybe developers of our vintage. Maybe this is why we like containerization so much, because we've suffered this pain of getting multiple. I'm still paranoid about installing different SDKs for different languages and different frameworks on my machine, because I'm worried it's going to. Maybe this is unfounded and things are managed better these days in later versions of Windows and better written software, but. I'm paranoid that I'm going to break something by having multiple things installed. So, let's run, let's build React apps and run them inside a container rather than having it run natively on the machine, just to try and get rid of the possibility of, I've installed React and now Angular doesn't work. It probably wouldn't, but yeah,
I'm still. Better to be safe than sorry.
I've been burned, just like you.
Yeah. Well, you can get around that by, like you were saying, by using the containers. I've seen some work done. It was an old video. I want to say it was around the Blazor 0.3, 0.4 days, so really early into Blazor's evolution. Alan Underwood from the Coding Blocks group, they got together. He sat there at his computer and did a live stream of, I'm going to do some Blazor application development without installing .NET Core. Now, it was difficult to do because he still needed to scaffold the app and he couldn't run it locally. But what he did was he pulled up Docker and built a Docker image for it and just did Docker build and then dealt with the compiler issues that happened, and then Docker run and then dealt with those issues. And that was super early into the development. But now that is kind of now part of Visual Studio. So you can do interactive debugging inside of a Docker container with Visual Studio for .NET Core /5/6/7/ all the numbers in the universe. And that means that you hit F5, it will compile your app, or rather you hit F5, it will copy your source code into a Docker container, build it inside the Docker container, run it inside the Docker container, expose it through some kind of port forwarding, and then expose the debug symbols as well. So you can hit a breakpoint in your source code running in Visual Studio and have bidirectional debugging going into the container, which is wonderful because then you don't technically need to install any of the tools except for Visual Studio, which comes with all the tools. But that's not the point.
Yeah, true. But I mean, if you can get that working with Visual Studio, can you get that working with Visual Studio Code? Possibly.
I've never tried it, but yeah, it's possible.
If it supports the same debugging symbol servers, assuming that's how it's implemented, then
can't see
why not? Why not?
Yeah. I mean, it's how Visual Studio Live Share works. Have you seen this? This is wonderful.
Yeah, your Live Share's good, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So like Harry and I could be working on the same code. Harry sends me a special link. I click the link because I don't care about security. Visual Studio starts on my computer. And then it sets up a shush tunnel, an SSH tunnel, a secure tunnel to Harry's computer. I can see the code that he has loaded. It's not on my machine. I can move around the source tree and look at other files in Harry's projects, make changes, run them, or rather I hit build on my machine. It does the build on Harry's machine, sends the debug symbols down to my machine, and I run it from there. But at the same time, Harry can hit build on his machine, doesn't conflict.
It's unbelievable.
Genius.
It is genius. But I think the main takeaway from this is that if I send you a link, please don't click it.
Not unless you are sending me a link to some kind of cat gif.
Well, you never know what will be embedded in that, though, would you?
Oh, my goodness. But So we're talking about how it gets easier. The closer to now you get, it gets easier. But then legacy isn't now, is it?
Well,
legacy is then.
If we go back to my initial definition, the initial definition, I shouldn't be claiming that definition because it's not mine. It's not mine, everybody. If we go back to that initial definition, it's not just code that was written 20 years ago, is it? It's code. It could be code that was written last week by by anybody. It could have been you. You could have taken you could have taken a shortcut and decided, you know what, I'm not going to TDD this up because I don't have time. And then it comes back to bite you a week later when you go, oh no, there's a bug in it. And
then you do git blame and it comes back to your name.
Yeah, and then you go, oh dear. Yes, I am that which I said I would never be. Yes,
that's it. So then, is there a difference? There must be a difference. We've just spent ages complaining about framework, right? Or rather about supporting applications that were written in framework, not framework itself. But what is the difference, if there is a difference indeed, between supporting apps on framework and supporting apps on core and 5? I mean, you said earlier when you haven't touched 5, but it's the same tooling, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing, my main takeaway is the sort of the CI/CD experience is easier and it's built more around testing. Don't get me wrong, you can definitely do it if it's been written in a relatively recent version of Visual Studio and relatively recently, and even if not, you could probably convert it. But Core set out from the outset to have these things as first-class citizens. As doing unit testing is a first-class citizen in the Core ecosystem. It isn't in framework. It feels like it's an afterthought. Dependency injection is a first-class citizen. I mean, even you could argue, I'd say that web servers are a first-class citizen when I don't really feel that they are in framework. But, okay, you could argue MVC is a big stride towards that, but it still doesn't feel as slick as the experience you have with framework. With Core. One thing I didn't discuss, which I think is quite a big difference actually, is the configuration system in .NET Core versus .NET Framework, because the configuration system in .NET Core is absolutely fantastic, in my opinion. I think the way that you can load bits of config over the sort of on top of each other, and they kind of merge together into a whole, which then becomes, you can extract these pieces of configuration out in a structured fashion. And they become, you're not just getting strings out of, you're not using key value pairs anymore. You're going, right, okay, let's extract this iOptions, myPoco, or, why don't we, or you can get the configuration out and let's you can stick an interface on your configurations class and start injecting it that way. And then you put it into your dependency injection through that. It's so much more integrated into it. And if you've ever used Azure Key Vault with it,
yep,
it's so great using Azure Key Vault. And if you ever think, well, I really can't, I don't know how not to embed my my application keys inside my inside my repo, Key Vault's a pretty good start to stop you do that. Key Vault is great if you're in Azure, and you can just add it. You can, there's, I believe there's a configuration setting which is add Azure Key Vault, and you pass it some some parameters. You can get it to use managed identity as well, so you can get it to talk directly from an app service to the Azure Key Vault, and as long as you've granted the permissions and it's got the necessary permissions it needs, bang, there you go. It appears in your configuration as if it was written in a JSON file underneath. I actually this was one of those, I can't get this to work properly, so I might do something totally ridiculous. When you go full mad scientist.
Yes.
trying to solve some problem, I thought, well, I need to write dynamic configuration files on the fly. I shouldn't admit to this actually, because this is pretty disgusting in some ways, but I'm going to tell it anyway, just for fun. It's like, well, I want to try and write a dynamic configuration file as part of my pipeline, so that I can pass some things in, and that part of .NET will pick it up. And I thought, well, I don't really want to bother doing some JSON deserialization to build JSON. And I don't want to build JSON manually because that feels too heavyweight. And it feels a bit nasty trying to, match your brackets and blah, 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 blah. But there's actually an ini file config provider built into .NET. So ini files, if you've never seen them, are incredibly, incredibly simple. So you can just write out some, you can use PowerShell to write out a load of strings into a file, save it with .ini extension, and then you can write your app so that it checks for an ini file with a particular name. Don't do that, kids. Please don't do it. But you can do it, and that's what counts.
But I think that's the biggest difference. We've talked about a lot of stuff so far, but I think the biggest difference between framework and core is like the ease of use. Like you were saying then about, I just need to add a couple. I'm extrapolating and I'm not quoting you directly, but I just need to add a few lines of code to my app, and I've got Azure Key Vault, and I don't have to do anything, right? And like you said then, it stops you from committing your secrets into source control, which is, I think if you go to GitHub and search for removing API, because there's a little search box, search for the phrase removing API keys, and you get millions of commits for loads of for all the different repos where somebody's committing removing an API key. Now, problem with that, of course, because what they've done is they've hard-coded the API key into some config or even into some code, hit compile, it's worked, commit it, brilliant, whoops, I've committed my API key, I shall remove it. That doesn't revoke it at all. That doesn't replace it in the Git history. You can still rewind to before that Git commit and get the API key. And so things like Azure Key Vault, there's an AWS version and a Google Compute version as well, or indeed user secrets, which is wonderful for that, is just making it easier to fall into the pit of success rather than the pit of failure. And I'm not trying to say that .NET Framework will let you fall into the pit of failure. I mean, almost any programming framework, API, library will let you fall into the pit of failure if you really want to. But it felt, at least with the config for me, with .NET Framework apps, you had this huge XML file that you had to figure out where your config bits went into. And if it went over a certain size, it just would not load. And then you had to figure out ways of extrapolating parts of it out to another file so that then the single file you're supposed to read isn't that big, but it knows to read the other file. And then if you wanted to swap out values as you moved from, say, dev to QA to release candidate to production, you had to have extra files in your repository with the production keys in it. So you've pulled the repository, you're only going to run it locally, but you've got a file with the actual production keys to the castle in there. And so nothing is secret anymore. But with .NET, I'll say .NET, but with .NET Core, .NET 5, there's this wonderful idea of user secrets. So you can assign a secret to your app. You can say, I've got an API key for Twilio, for Mongo, I've got a connection string or whatever. You can go into the command line or in Visual Studio, right-click the project and go Manage Secrets, type it all in there, and what happens is it's wonderful, just like you said, Harry. When you load the app config in, it loads an app settings.json file and populates all of that. And then it looks for an app settings dot my environment name here.json. And if that exists, it will load that too. And then replace the previously loaded values, which is amazing. And then it loads your user secrets and replaces any values it already sees. And then it will look at Key Vault as well and do the same thing, but that's at runtime. And it also does the command line. So you can, if you really desperately want to, you can do .NET run and then put I think it's environment or configuration. I think it's environment and then your variable name. And then you can type the value in and that gets replaced at runtime with all of the previous values. And that, I believe, is how one of the Azure secret stores works as well. So it sort of intercepts you running your app and then replaces it. So then you never see it. It's amazing. All of these wonderful ways to manage secrets and API keys just built in. Wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. And framework would, like, as you said, it was, you wouldn't be falling into the pit of success there, would you? You really wouldn't.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got, with framework, with your CI/CD pipelines, you've likely got config transforms, which is a wonderfully difficult to grok form of XML that would look for certain words and features within your web config or your app config and replace whole sections of it. But the problem is, you wouldn't know whether it worked until it got to the server it was going to run on, and then you ran it, and then it fell over.
Yes, was that XSLT?
That's it.
Yeah,
yes.
XSLT. Yeah, I do remember doing
invariably with a bunch of commits that were fixing XSLT again. Okay, this one might work. Nope, this one might work. Nope, fixed it finally. Nope, that didn't work. And then a bunch of expletives, and then finally figured it out. XLST is fixed, and then somebody changes the API key, and then you have to go all the way back around again. Or maybe that was just me.
No, I remember that. I remember pretty much exactly the same thing. I've never been a fan of things which you can't test them before you before you run them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. You've got no proof that it's going to work.
Exactly.
So,
one of the things I do have a problem with the current ecosystem, this is more about Azure DevOps, is Azure pipelines. Sorry, the YAML pipelines. Because right now, unless somebody knows better than me, I don't know of a way where you can test those pipelines without throwing them at your Azure pipelines.
Yeah.
Without actually running it in the cloud.
You have to commit it and then run it on Azure, and then it falls over. Yeah, exactly. You've wasted all your build minutes.
There are exactly. There are ways around it. You could use something like Nuke, which would have a bit more consistency there. I believe you can make Nuke output as your pipeline scripts. I'm not massively experienced in Nuke, but I have played with it and know a few people that have also played with it. So so you can go towards getting a bit more consistency, maybe that way, by using a build script that you can run, .NET scripting language or system that you can run locally. Mm-hmm. So new core is cake.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you're using GitHub Actions, there's an unofficial repo for an NPM action that will let you run. It pulls down a container. Again, you're running unknown code on your computer. Pulls down a container that purports to be the tools or relevant tools that are similar to GitHub's GitHub Actions, and then will run your GitHub action on a container on your local machine. But again, A, you can't see the container, and B, you're running code that you can't read. You're running code that isn't visible to you.
I'd be very wary of running containers that aren't from a reputable. And yes, you can debate what reputable means, of course. But you sort of, Harry's random container image. It's legit, honest. I'm always a bit wary of running that kind of stuff.
I mean, you said earlier on, it's the same problem, right? You said earlier on, how do I know that the code I'm pulling from NuGet is the code that came from the repository? How do I know that the code I'm running in my container, it's a discussion for another show, I think, but how do I know the code in my container is actually the code that it purports to be in the image file or on GitHub? You don't know until you actually inspect it.
Yeah, I think you've got two options really for verification, and one of those is not verification at all. It's basically you saying, well, here's a set of sources I trust and everything else I don't. Mm-hmm. Or the other option is to go through it line by line. to see how it was built. Yeah, and then, you know, if it starts pulling down NPM packages, then, as you say, you've got a chain of dependencies you then have to check.
So, talking about framework and core run 5 and 6, just to go back to that a little bit, as we sort of wrap up. In your opinion, is it worth it? And should I? And if I should, how do I move my app from framework to core? Should I even bother? Right, it's working, right? And then I could pay someone like you loads of money to keep it working, right?
Yes, I just get a nice big legacy hat, shall I? Legacy sombrero. Yes, pay me lots of money to wear my legacy sombrero and help you out. I think I would say the answer is it depends. However, I think if you are maybe a technical decision maker, for want of a better phrase, which I keep saying for want of a better phrase a lot, so I need a better phrase.
Because you want a better phrase?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'm still searching. If you're one thing you have to take into account around framework and core is also there's going to get to a point where, and we may already be at that point, where developers are going to say, if they're looking for new roles, or indeed if they're in an existing role, they may go, I don't want to do framework anymore because that's the past. You know, okay, yes, Microsoft says it's not the past, it's the future, but it's not where the new development's going. You're not going to be able to use the new and shiny, which, you know, say another reason to use core over framework is the new language features as well, which are not available. If correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the newer language features are not available in framework.
That's right. Yep.
So if you want your fancy switch expressions or default interface implementations, you can't have those in framework. So I think that's one argument to say perhaps we ought to be going towards framework. You can't have everything driven by the developers, of course, but the fact that the cadence of core is so much higher, you don't want to be waiting around for Microsoft to release a security update for framework. The fact that core can be released so much more quickly means that they can react to any potential security issues in the framework much more quickly. Don't get me. I can't guess at Microsoft's framework security model because I don't know it. There probably is published somewhere, but I don't know it. But my guess is they would not be able to react as quickly with framework as they would be able to with core. And that means you can't react as quickly. So what are you going to do in that situation where we know there's a vulnerability in framework? I don't know of any. I'm not saying there are any, but if there were, it would be much harder to find and much more time consuming because you're limited by Microsoft much more here. The fact is that somebody could find and fix a vulnerability in core themselves because it's all open source. Mm-hmm. They could find that, you say to them, you could create a PR to Microsoft, I found the security vulnerability and here's my fix for it. And they could accept that on the same day that you find it, if you've written the fix already.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then as soon as that build finishes, you could pull that version of the SDK, version of the runtime. Maybe it's just a NuGet package. You automatically get that fix for free. Immediately.
And it's there. Like I say, it's on NuGet. So, if it's not one of the core libraries, you pull it down from NuGet if you're using it. And there it is. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a pretty strong argument for that moving over to it. But any other benefits beyond security and language features and what have you got a CID? Have you got a CI/CD pipeline? If you have got one, okay, maybe things are okay. But what happens if you don't have a CI/CD pipeline? Are you going to invest the money in creating a framework pipeline when you know that's not that's not where the development's going, that's not where the direction that's being taken with that version of .NET? Are you going to think, well, if we're going to overhaul this part of the development process, should we not perform some upgrading at the same time? Because I think to investigate whether an upgrade works, it's probably not that expensive. It might not work, but I think, to copy code over, and I imagine there are a huge number of blog posts around this now that Core's been around for, well, you're the expert here, 5 years. Mm-hmm. Now it's been around for 5 years. There's going to be, a variety of blog posts that have been created, some by Microsoft, I imagine, on this process. It's in their interest to do this as well, isn't it? To get people to do this. And then, it is going to open up potentially some opportunities to you as well. So let's say you're in Azure and you're running in a VM and you don't know how to move that over. Well, if you move it over towards Core, and you might be able to move towards app services, you might be able to move towards containers. There's so many benefits, and there's also the performance improvements. There's a big performance increase from 3 to 5, isn't there, or a noticeable one? Let alone going from framework to 5. I imagine if you ran the same, it'd be interesting to see what the benchmarks would be for somebody upgrading from framework 4.x, a framework 4.x web API application, for example, to Net 5. I don't know what the numbers would be, but I think they would be pretty impressive. And all you would be doing is fixing those regression issues of it doesn't work in, this API is no longer available, or you need to convert your web server bootstrapping from, the old framework style to Core. So, I think you could, well, it depends how much experience of Core you've got, but I think it could be possible to do that it could be possible probably to do it for small applications, maybe in a day. Mm-hmm. And then you've got, and if you've got a free Friday afternoon sometime, why don't you somebody could give it a go.
Yeah. I'd caution against anything that uses Windows stuff, because Windows specific stuff, whilst it is available in Core, is only available on Windows, right? WinForms, WCF, Windows authentication, anything that uses Windows, only available on Windows. But if you're only developing on Windows, only going to deliver to Windows, you should be able to get away with it.
Yes, that's true. It's a fair point. I missed out there that the containerization piece and the may not be possible for certain workloads, for certain project types, and something like web forms. I don't believe that the migration path for web forms is, can you migrate this to Blazor, please? Isn't that
I think that is exactly the migration path is, hey, there's this thing called Blazor. Or, if you haven't heard of it, hey, there's this thing called MVC. Right? That's not to make fun of anyone who does web forms stuff. It's just there's a slightly different way to do it now, which is a little bit... going from web forms to MVC takes a bit of time to figure out, but I feel like it's worth the investing that time, because when you get to that point, it's easy. It's easier to maintain. It's simpler to maintain. It's faster to run because you don't have the millions of callbacks going left, right, and center to the server and back, and it becomes safer as well because you don't have. It's not required to use hidden fields in web forms, but it became almost a standard. Hey, you want some information that needs to go back and forward to the server and the client? Stick it in a hidden field. Don't worry about it because no one's going to see it, right? Hidden fields, that's technically a CSRF attack. Cross-site request forgery attack waiting to happen. So, yeah.
Yes, so if you're in web forms, you might have to re-architect everything if you want to go to Core. But but you say that about WinForms, you can do it. You can run it on .NET Core, and I think if you were to move it over to .NET Core, you could maybe use something like, you could migrate to something like Squirrel to do your application deployments. I mean, I've never used Squirrel myself, but it's sort of an application data framework, how I understand it. I believe does Slack use it? I can't remember.
Yes, so if you have some kind of desktop application and you want it to handle auto updates, you can attach a Squirrel worker, and every so often the Squirrel worker, it can either pub sub, so it will subscribe to being told when there is an update, or it can say, hey, is there an update? And then it handles installing the update for you. It's wonderful.
Yeah. So, yeah, you could go down that rather than having to, carry on with your clunky Windows installer project. And then, if you go down that route, then, you got your CI/CD pipeline, because you can move away from having to create install shield install scripts, because I've no idea how you get those to work in a CI/CD pipeline. And yeah, things become much easier to handle. We'll make it sound quite easy here. All you need to do is use this, and this. Click a few buttons, and it's all fine. Or actually, run a few commands.
To use that meme, all you need to do is draw the first circle, and then draw the rest of the owl. That's it.
Yes. Yeah. The first circle is .NET Core.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a non-trivial upgrade. And there are plenty of books and courses and, like you said, blog posts and YouTube videos on how to do it. And there will be parts that are difficult to do. And I think the official guidance from Microsoft so far has been extract what you can, leave what can't be moved, and wrap that in a service and call that. So, like, if your entire app uses Windows authentication, take out everything that isn't actually doing. It's good application design, right? Take out everything that's not doing the authentication and have that as your core business app, and have it call an API which is exposed by something that's running on .NET Framework to do the authentication, and maybe return a token or return something, some kind of identity thing, like a token or a capability or something that says you are allowed to do this on behalf of the user. And then you'll move that core difficult bit that is performance required, that's performance related, that is security related, out somewhere that it can run perhaps on core, perhaps on 5. And then the other stuff you can look at maybe migrating another time.
Yes. Yeah. So yes. No. So you use something like the strangler pattern, or so you can take little stripes out. That would be a more sensible way of doing it. So you look at using the strangler pattern to move things towards maybe a more sensibly architected solution if you've got some monolithic web service or web app, and you take your little stripes out, and you move those over into .NET Core services like you suggest, and then before you know it, the whole thing's running in .NET Core, and you've got all these beautiful pipelines set up that and framework is a thing of the past.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least for at least for your application.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to go. I think that's going to happen for a lot of these enterprises, where they're like, oh gosh, we have this app that runs .NET Framework 2, and we need it to be written in .NET Core. And moving piecemeal is easier, right? Rather than to take this huge monolithic thing and move the whole thing. No, move. Like you said, a slice of it. Take a tracer bullet, hit an API and follow it all the way to the database and back. Take that bit and move it over, or rather take that bit and copy it over, run the both in tandem, make sure they're both talking to that same database, making the same database calls, changing the database in the same way, responding in a similar way, because you may be moving from cookie authentication to JWT. I wouldn't recommend changing too many things, but make sure that it is responding in the same way, and that the entire path is the same. And you do that enough times, you've slowly migrated the app across, and maybe you can destroy the old version because you don't need it. Who knows, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that can be a way to do sort of cloud migrations as well, can't it? Mm. If you've got something monolithic running in your in a data center, take bits of it out into Azure, into any of the cloud providers, and then there it is.
Absolutely. But I feel like that's perhaps a discussion for another time. So moving into cloud stuff there.
Oh, yes. Literally don't get me started.
So, just as a way of stopping us from going on another journey into let's complain about framework and let's talk about how core's brilliant, /5/6/7, whatever. What about let's talk about you, Harry. What's a great way for the listeners to catch up with you and figure out what you're doing, hear about your rants and ravings and stuff like that? What's the best way to do that?
I'm on Twitter, moderately active. My DMs are open if people want to chat to me about, well, anything really. Doesn't have to be tech related, preferably tech related, but if you've got a question about, I'll answer any question pretty much. But no, let's stick to tech things. Yeah, happy to, always happy to answer any questions if people want any advice or want to say actually what you said on this podcast was wrong. Or any other podcast, happy, feel free to contact me. I've also been in the process of building a blog, which hopefully by the time this is out, the blog will be live on harrybellamy.com, because I couldn't think of a witty name for it. And I checked that is available. So that'll, I'm just intending to write, nothing that's not necessarily anything that's going to change the world, but it's just sort of going through my journey in development, things that I come across, any problems that I've encountered that I've been, things where there's missing documentation or something was difficult, I managed to overcome it. I want to share that so I can learn in public, so other people can basically not have the same pain that I've had. I'm a great believer in learning in public and, being able to share that with people.
Cool. Okay. What I'll do is I'll make sure that there's some links in the show notes for people who want to click through. There is going to be a full transcription. It's partially a machine transcription, so there'll be some words that it doesn't quite. The JSON thing we talked about earlier on, and when I said CSurf, it's going to fall over, but for the most part, it's correct. But yeah, at the bottom of that transcription will be a bunch of links to some stuff that Harry's doing. When it comes closer to the time to release the episode, I'll check with Harry to see if his website's up. If it's not, then I'll mildly yell at him to get the website up and running.
Yes, you need to get your finger out. Sorry, I forgot to say that. Yeah, my Twitter handle's at @hbellamy. So that's where that's the primary place you can reach me.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll put links to all of that in the show notes. And the last thing that I have to say, Harry, is thank you ever so much for being on the show. It's been wonderful talking legacy stuff with you, and we've gone on for an hour and 20 odd minutes now, and there's still loads to talk about, because we didn't actually get to how in the heck do you manage talking how in the heck do you manage supporting framework apps with the millions of different framework versions required on your computer, and all it must be difficult.
Well, yeah, it sounds like we've got a lot of discussions for a lot of other times.
Absolutely. You're always welcome back on.
Thank you very much.
As long as this hasn't scared you off.
No. Well, I like you said, I did tabs and spaces, and that didn't scare me away, did it? But no, I just want to say thanks a lot for having me on, Jamie. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks a lot for running the podcast so diligently for all this time. It's been a value to me. So, and I'm sure it's been a value to all the listeners out there. So I just want to say thanks on mine and their behalf.
Hey, no worries. If you're interested as well, I'll put a link to the episode of Tabs and Spaces that Harry was on into the show notes, so you can click that and listen to that even more Harry content. Because why not, right?
Why not? Yeah. Yeah, well, why not?
We'll make you an internet superstar somehow, that's all.
Well, yeah, I've certainly got the face for a podcast,
yeah. Well, catch you next time.
Cheers.
That was my interview with Harry Bellamy about the differences between supporting both Greenfield and Brownfield applications in both .NET Core /5 and .NET Framework. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that. And to come back next time for more .NET goodness. See you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.